Our Torah portion this week is called Vayigash, which means "and came near." In this portion, we reach the climax of the story of Joseph and his long-estranged brothers. The events at the end of the story of Joseph parallel the events at the beginning of the story. When Jacob sent Joseph to check on the welfare of his brothers and the flocks back in the Promised Land, Joseph was greeted with being thrown into a pit that had no water. While Joseph suffered in the pit, his brothers sat down to a meal. Now, in contrast, when Jacob sent his other sons to Egypt, and unknown to them at the time, to Joseph, now second in command of all of Egypt, they were greeted with hospitality and water to wash their feet, and a meal was prepared for them. At this meal, the brothers gave Joseph presents instead of imprisonment. I'm Dan Cathcart, and this is Words from Our Father. At the beginning of the story of Joseph, the brothers plotted to kill him, but instead sold him into slavery. They then deceived Jacob, their father, into thinking that Joseph was dead. Their selfish actions had the unintended consequences. Now, Jacob's mourning for Joseph was intense and long-lasting. As this portion begins, it had now been 22 years since they had sold Joseph into slavery, and Jacob was still mourning the loss of Joseph. But Joseph was alive and well, and his suffering had ended in Egypt. As second in command to Pharaoh, Joseph had been ruling over Egypt for 9 years. He was living a life of wealth and power. Joseph had prepared carefully for the coming famine, and then, over the last 2 years, provided grain for all the people of Egypt. Genesis 41, verse 55. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do." Now the famine extended to all the lands around Egypt as well, driving the people from the surrounding nations to come to Egypt to buy grain, which Joseph had carefully stored away. When Joseph's brothers came to buy grain, Joseph immediately recognized them, but they did not recognize him. Joseph wanted to know if they were still the vindictive, hateful brothers who had plotted to kill him, or had they changed? Now, since the youngest brother, Benjamin, had not come with them to Egypt, the most important question that Joseph wanted answered was, how had they treated his brother Benjamin? Now, were they as hateful to Benjamin as they were to him? Joseph devised a scheme to test his brothers. Joseph would keep Simeon in prison until they brought Benjamin to Egypt so he could see and observe Benjamin and how they had treated him. Now, when the brothers returned with Benjamin, Joseph had them brought into his presence. Look at Genesis 43, 24 and 25. So the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their donkeys feed. Then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread there. Joseph greeted his brothers with words reminiscent of his original mission to check on their welfare. He asked about not only their welfare, but the welfare of their father. Genesis 43, verse 27. Then he asked them about their well-being and said, "Is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive?" Joseph had them all sit down to a banquet prepared for them. Joseph set them down in the order of their birth, demonstrating that he knew them well. Genesis 43, 33 through 34. And they set before him the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. Then he took servings to them from before them. But Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. Now Benjamin's serving was 5 times that given to the older brothers. Now there are several levels of meaning to be gleaned from this account. First, the favoritism to Benjamin is meant to bring to light any jealousy that the brothers may have when Benjamin is later accused of theft. Now, if they are jealous of Benjamin, they would more than likely to leave Benjamin over to his fate. Now, on another level, Benjamin received 5 times the amount of food at this banquet than his brothers had. Now, 5 times the amount is the payback to be given as restitution for a guilt offering. Joseph's brothers had stolen and sold Joseph into slavery, so they owed 5 times the value in restitution. The Torah explains this principle in the case of a stolen ox. Exodus 22, verse 1. If a man steals an ox or a sheep, and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. Joseph may be subtly reminding his brothers of the redemption price they owe to Benjamin because of their sale of him into slavery. Now, but we see that it is Joseph himself who eventually pays this redemption price, even though it is his brothers who actually owe it. Genesis 45, verse 22. He gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. After the banquet, Joseph's real test of his brothers is put into motion. The brothers are sent on their way, but the silver that they had paid for the grain that they were returning home with was also placed in their grain sacks, and the silver cup belonging to Joseph is secretly placed in Benjamin's sack. Genesis 44, 1 and 2. And he commanded the steward of his house, saying, Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. Also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain money. So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. Now silver represents redemption. When God took the children of Israel as his own at Mount Sinai, he had them numbered, but only through the offering of a half shekel of silver for each person. This offering is described as a ransom or atonement. Exodus 30, 11 and 12. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, When you take the census of the children of Israel for their number, then every man shall give a ransom for himself to the Lord, when you number them, that there may be no plague among them when you number them. The returned money, along with Joseph's silver cup, emphasizes the theme of redemption. In Matthew's Gospel account, we see Yeshua referring to a cup when James and John's mother wanted her sons to be at Yeshua's side. Yeshua asked them if they could drink from the same cup that he drank from. Matthew 20, 22 and 23. But Jesus answered and said, You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? And they said to him, We are able. So he said to them, You will indeed drink my cup, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared by my Father. Now, just as Yeshua's cup of redemption cannot be stolen, given away, or used by anyone other than the Messiah, Joseph's cup could not be stolen, given away, or used by anyone other than Joseph without serious consequences. The test of the stolen cup was laid out for Joseph's brothers. Benjamin was destined for slavery unless someone else stepped up. When Joseph's silver cup was found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers tore their clothes in grief. Look at Genesis 44, verse 13. Then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. Now once again, this takes us back to the beginning of the story, when Joseph's brothers took Joseph's coat of many colors, which Jacob had gifted to him, tore it, and put goat's blood on it to cover up what they had done. Now they tear their own garments in response to what was done to Benjamin. As all the brothers are brought before Joseph for judgment, would they allow Benjamin to go into slavery, or would they stand up for him? Judah, who had lost 2 sons of his own, could not let their father Jacob lose both Joseph and Benjamin. Judah approached Joseph to plead for Benjamin's freedom. Genesis 44, verse 18. Then Judah came near to him and said, "O my lord, please let your servant speak a word in my lord's hearing, and do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh." Judah goes on to plead for Benjamin's freedom because of the harm his imprisonment would do to Jacob. Judah explains that he took responsibility for Benjamin's safety and could not return without him. Genesis 44:32. "For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever." Now once again, this contrasts with the beginning of the story when Judah takes the lead to sell Joseph into slavery as opposed to killing him as the rest of the brothers wanted to do. Now Judah again takes the lead, this time pleading for Benjamin's safety and even offering to take his place in slavery. Genesis 44:33 and 34. "Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father?" With this act, Joseph and Judah come together, both desiring the best outcome for Benjamin. Joseph desires to know that Benjamin has been well treated with his family, and Judah desires to know that Benjamin will be returned to his father. Now, after hearing the desperate plea that Judah makes regarding Benjamin, Joseph could not restrain himself any longer. He orders that the room be cleared of all the Egyptians, so it would be only himself and his brothers present when he gave way to his emotions. Genesis 45:1 and 3. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. In all of Joseph's trials, the Bible records Joseph weeping only twice. First when he sees Benjamin, and now when he is about to reveal himself to his brothers. The Bible records that Yeshua also wept twice. He wept when his good friend Lazarus died, and then he wept over Jerusalem, and the fact that his identity was hidden from his brothers. Luke 19:41 and 42. Now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, "If you had known, even you, especially in your day, the things that make for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes." Joseph's brothers were understandably confused and fearful. The Egyptian that held control over all of Egypt was actually their brother that they had sold into slavery. What would Joseph do with his brothers now that he had control over their destiny? Had he brought them there to put them into slavery as they had done to him? Joseph discerned their thoughts and reassured them. He recognized God's hand on all that had led to him being sold into slavery and then raised to the right hand of Pharaoh. Look at Genesis 45:4 and 5. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." So they came near, and he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life." Joseph's death to his family and new life in Egypt was necessary to preserve lives of the Egyptians and the nations around Egypt, and eventually his own family. Joseph's exile was necessary to set up the exile that God told Abraham would happen to his descendants. If Joseph had not been the one in control of Egypt when the famine hit, Jacob's entire family would most likely have starved or perhaps become slaves in a foreign land. God's promise to Abraham would have been broken. Instead, they enter as honored guests in Egypt and receive the best grazing land for their flocks and their cattle. The Chumash explains the connection between Joseph announcing himself to his brothers and God's eventual revealing his plan to Israel. When Joseph said, "I am Joseph," God's master plan became clear to the brothers. They had no more questions. Everything that had happened for the last 22 years fell into perspective. So too it will be in the time to come when God will reveal himself and announce, "I am Hashem." The veil will be lifted from our eyes, and we will comprehend everything that has transpired throughout history. The eyes of the brothers were blinded to the identity of their brother Joseph. While Joseph remained hidden from his brothers, Joseph's actions while in Egypt brought salvation to the Egyptians and many other peoples during the famine. Paul tells us that the spiritual blindness of Israel was necessary to bring salvation to the Gentiles. When that is accomplished, the eyes of Israel will be open to see their salvation. Look at Romans 11:25 through 27. "For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness, in part, has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant with them, when I take away their sins." After Joseph explained that the famine would continue for 5 more years, Joseph's brothers were finally able to speak. Genesis 45:14 through 15. "Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and after that his brothers talked with him." Joseph's brothers, who were unable to speak peaceably to him at the beginning of this account, were now able to speak to him. Joseph immediately sent his brothers to bring word to his father that he was alive. When Jacob received word that Joseph was alive, he is at first referred to as Jacob, but when he receives word and believes, he is then referred to as Israel, the one who struggles with God and prevails. Look at Genesis 45:26 through 28. "And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive and is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still, because he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father was revived. Then Israel said, It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive, and I will go and see him before I die." As Jacob made his journey from Hebron south towards Egypt, he came to Beersheba, where he began to have second thoughts. When famine was in the land when he was a boy, his father Isaac remained in the land. Also, Jacob had already lived in exile from the promised land for 20 years. Now should he once again leave the land or stay like Isaac did? Jacob sought the Lord by bringing offerings at Beersheba, and God appeared to him in a vision. Genesis 46:2 through 4. Then God spoke to Israel in the vision of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. When Jacob and his family were facing starvation, suddenly salvation appeared in the form of the carts and camels sent by Joseph, ready to carry them into the safety of Egypt. When the time of Yeshua's second coming approaches, God will send salvation. Look at Isaiah 11, 11 through 13. It shall come to pass that in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left, from Assyria and Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and the islands of the sea. He will set up a banner for the nations, and will assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Also the envy of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. The sons of Jacob, separated for 22 years, were finally reunited in the fertile land of Goshen, but not before Joseph had put his brothers to a test. Joseph tested them to see how they had treated his brother Benjamin in his absence. Now, would they take this responsibility and do what was right and return to Joseph in humility? Now, only after passing the test did Joseph reveal his true identity. This reconciliation among brothers did not come without a price. Joseph suffered slavery and imprisonment in Egypt as a result of the actions of his brothers. Knowing what they had done, the brothers suffered through years of facing a grieving father and the humiliation of famine in their land. And we too face a daily test. Yeshua tests us to see how we treat our brothers and sisters around us. Do we pass our test? In the end, will we be invited into our land of Goshen? I'm Dan Cathcart from Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.